Okay, yes, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm John McIntyre at Georgia Institute of Technology. Welcome to the 13th annual France Atlanta event, which is now in its 13th year, 2022, under the auspices of the French Embassy, the Mayor of Atlanta, the Governor of Georgia, and the President of Georgia Tech to celebrate the unique relationship between the state of Georgia and France, but also the Georgia Institute of Technology and France. This is part of a seminar which has been held before. This is the annual Humanitarian Logistics Seminar. And without further ado, I will introduce the speakers and say a few words about the speakers and more details. But I will turn it over to Madame Anne-Laure Desjonquères, who is the new French Consul General in Atlanta, having joined us in our new posting barely a month ago. Madame Desjonquères, the floor is yours to get us going.
Thank you very much, John. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this humanitarian live webinar on the role of sustainability in disaster preparedness, response and recovery for businesses and communities. My name is Anne-Laure Desjonquères. I'm the new Consul General of France in Atlanta. Today's webinar is part of France Atlanta. This is an event series co-organized by the Consulate General of France and Georgia Tech in Atlanta. This event series was created over 10 years ago. The aim is to connect people and institutions of France and the region of Atlanta. Our series focuses on innovation and the debate of ideas in the fields of humanitarian affairs, science, culture, business. We have a full program, a very diverse and interesting one. So I encourage you to discover it. You can see the details on our website, franceatlanta.org. So I'm very happy to join for this webinar today. And I would like to take the opportunity to thank our partners at Georgia Tech for helping us organizing this event. I would also like to thank this year's sponsors, without whom France Atlanta would not be possible. So I'd like to name the Raymond Chinazi and Family Foundation, Air France, and Delta Airlines. I'm really delighted to hear from today's panelists. The issues they will discuss have clearly become a priority for all of us. So I look forward to hearing your perspectives on the challenges we currently face and the way forward. I wish everyone an excellent webinar. Thank you very much. Merci.
Thank you, Madame Desjonquères. Wishing you a good trip today. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our three speakers. We have three top professionals representing one NGO created in 1945, CARE, one global company created in 1907, and the unique, of course, ICRC created in 1863 by Henri Dunant. And in order of presentation, we're going to go first with Gilles Carbonnier. Let me introduce the speakers first. They're going to have about 15 minutes, roughly, and then we can turn it over to the audience for questions and answers. And Pinar, I hope you join me in the question and answers phase. So I won't eat up any more time of the speaker's presentation. So first, Gilles Carbonnier, Vice President of the International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC, since 2018. He's an economist by training. He's a colleague at the Geneva Institute for International and Development Studies. A lot of expertise in the field of the economic dynamics of armed conflict and the relationship between natural resources and development. Latest book, 2016, Oxford University Press, Humanitarian Economics, War, Disaster, and the Global Aid Market. A lot of experience starting really in the late 80s, where he was posted in Ethiopia, Iraq, Sri Lanka, El Salvador. Also on the board of Médecins Sans Frontières, and in charge of, I note with interest, because I teach international trade relations, was involved in international trade negotiations at the WTO. welcome, Gilles. Give me a minute to introduce our next speaker, Dan Keim, who is with UPS World Headquarters, which is just very close to us at Georgia Tech. We are in Midtown. They are outside on the periphery of Atlanta. Dan is the Director of Humanitarian Logistics at the UPS Foundation. And he leads humanitarian, he is involved with leading agencies in humanitarian and ministries of health to enhance public health supply chains and build supply chain capacity, bringing to bear the unique experience of one of the oldest logistics company in the world. He has a huge amount of experience in the field of logistics. He was in charge of customer solutions, managing director of global solutions at UPS. So it's fair to say he knows the field of logistics and humanitarian logistics inside out, and the company also. Last but not least, and I had the pleasure of meeting her yesterday, Deepmala Mahla, who is, of course, like all of you, a world traveler. And we had been playing phone tags with each other and finally reached each other. So let me introduce Deepmala. It's my pleasure to introduce her. She's the Vice President for Humanitarian Affairs at CARE, and she has served in the past also as Regional Director for Asia. She has also been Country Director in a number of places that are exemplars of disaster relief needs, such as South Sudan with Mercy Corps, Uganda with Mary Stokes International. She has also had experience in Yemen and the United Kingdom, which is, of course, one of the platforms from which a lot of disaster reliefs are launched. Indonesia, India, Oxfam. She is a strong humanitarian voice, influencing actively for better the most vulnerable communities in the impacted world. She is an anthropologist by training. So we have a unique panel, and I really wish we had more than 1 hour, but we don't. So we'll get started, and it's my pleasure to ask Gilles to please take us into the field.
Well, good morning, everyone in Atlanta, and thank you so much, John McIntyre, for your very kind words of introduction. It's a great pleasure to join you and just to say a few words, seen from Geneva, from the International Committee of the Red Cross. So thank you also for all the organizers, because I think the topic that you have selected, which is the question of synergistic collaboration to try to address the huge, immense challenges that we have ahead of us, is very timely, very relevant. What we see, well, recently, I think you have seen Hurricane Ian on the Florida coast, then moving up the coast in the US, and we can see what more frequent, violent, extreme weather events can bring and how it challenges our capacity to react. Here, of course, we're also thinking of the international conflict in Ukraine with its daily human tragedies, and which really adds another big layer of complexity and challenges to humanitarian situations writ large. And I think what is new today is not each humanitarian crisis, so to speak, that we have seen, but this overlapping of multi-layered crises. And frankly, no one can address them alone. And this is why we have to join hands and see how we can devise innovative ways of working together. Conflicts do not end. They tend to go on for decades. And many of these protracted conflicts, they create situations of hyper-fragility. And on top of that, people living in this situation of hyper-fragility have been really hit by the knock-on effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, by the impact of climate change. They are probably also the same people who are mostly affected, and now by the knock-on effect of the conflict in Ukraine. So, John, if you allow me, I'd like to first discuss scale, then sustainability, a short note on Ukraine, and then a word on humanitarian logistics. As you know, the ICRC, we are working worldwide to assist and protect the populations affected by armed conflicts. We have about 22,000 people, and we work together with the international movement of the Red Cross and Crescent. And with regard to scale, we realize that we have to enter into innovative partnerships in order to address the challenges. Give me one example and bring you to the field. We have been active in Goma for decades in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. We see that we have done water trucking for West Goma, where you have 350 displaced people and people coming and they are not connected to the drinking water system, nor to the wastewater treatment system. And they will soon be 500,000. So we have started as ICRC to work with the water board, with private contractors to see what we can do to extend the sanitation and water systems. We liaise with the World Bank, with the Africa Development Bank, with an interest of Agence Française de Développement, and with the Swedish and Swiss development agencies to say, okay, I think we can really do something for this sprawling city of Goma, that it's much more ambitious by working together, and each of us bringing our distinct expertise and know-how of how we can not only fix, but expand the system, providing critical services. And this is an example of a project where we were thinking of putting some $10 million on the table, which ends up probably being 150 million, each of the actors bringing not only the money, but also the expertise to work with the municipal authorities, with local contractors, etc. So scale is key. Second, sustainability. We have decided to cut our own emissions of CO2 by half until 2030. And we discovered that about 2/3 to 3/4 of our emissions are indirect through the purchases of goods and services. So we have to work really throughout the supply chain. And what we do is that we have this humanitarian logistics focusing on sustainability. We have introduced some time ago quality, social, and environmental assessments of our main suppliers, with a focus not only on best value for money, of course, but also quality, safety, the durability of the products, and the usage, and the low environmental impact. We also look into the health and safety working conditions of our manufacturing sites to make sure that we are consistent with our humanitarian values. Now, if I move and just try to disentangle this a bit with Ukraine. We have been active in Ukraine for many years. We had about 600 staff working especially in the Donbass since 2014. But of course, when you had this huge escalation of the international conflict starting on the 24th of February, we had to scale up and be able to bring supplies into Ukraine. So we have established logistics bases in all the countries surrounding Ukraine. And we particularly established an important base in Hungary. And there we could find a partnership of sort with a supplier who had both the warehousing and handling company that had decided to donate in kind the warehousing rent and to provide in-kind support of services so that we could facilitate this. All in all, this is a very important support that we get through their expertise and the fact that they had the services up and running on the ground. What we see is that when we have pre-existing partnerships, like for instance with a major pharmaceutical company producing insulin for diabetes, immediately we can work with them to bring the insulin and try to respond to the needs in Ukraine. What is a problem is that we also get a lot of unsolicited donations, and these unsolicited donations often do not correspond to the needs or add to the pressure on our logistics, and it can even hamper some of the logistics work that we do by bringing our supply chains to congestion, being more a problem than a solution when we try to be fast and reach the people. So this shows how important it is to engage with strategic partners early on and be ready and know how we can work together when an emergency strikes. Another issue which is interesting is that we had a discussion with a major food company. And at the time where we were about to receive ready-to-use meals, we, the Red Cross and the ICRC, we were targeted by a misinformation and disinformation campaign. And because of this disinformation campaign on social media, it is the company that suddenly said, oh, are we right to associate ourselves with you because we hear that there is a campaign on social media that is not positive about your work. And I think this, we have to deal with it and be sure that the partners we are in understand how we operate and you know, that we build trust and full understanding. By the same token, that company was also challenged with regard to how they handled a number of issues in the region. And then we see that the question of reputation matters for both partners. So these are interesting things to consider also when we build partnerships. Then I'd like to conclude with humanitarian logistics. I think for greater sustainability, learning from others is key. We have seen companies investing for years in environmental accounting, in trying to have a supply chain and value chain that are as much as possible sustainable from a social and environmental perspective. We see that there have been carbon accounting tools that are very useful for the private sector. They have to be adapted, and we have adapted one for the humanitarian sector that will be available soon in open access format, also for not only the Red Cross, Red Crescent, but beyond for the humanitarian sector. So with regard to procurement, it is often very useful to team up with other humanitarian organizations for scale and to bring enough demand so that we get products, services with the right specification, going through a life cycle analysis of not only the fact that it's fit for use, but it's also as less pollutant as possible with regards to the whole life cycle and waste that are produced. So we do that with other humanitarian organizations, and we do that also locally. For instance, we have a logistical base in Douala, which is important for Central Africa and the region. And there we are concluding ISO 14001 certification to set really good criteria for sound environmental management. And I think by going through this exercise, we can then replicate this in other important logistical bases. So to conclude, I think we need to team up with others, including, of course, our peers, humanitarian organizations and agencies, but also with companies and universities. And let me just mention that we have seen how really important, but how also powerful it is to tap into scientific advances and technological advances developed in tech school. And since we are here at Georgia Tech School, I think it's important to mention that, for instance, in Switzerland, we have an ongoing partnership with the technological schools of Zurich and Lausanne to really develop solutions through research, joint research, that will help us find interesting solutions, including in terms of logistics. So I think this is something that would be interesting to continue a dialogue on, and we very much look forward first to this panel and to hear the colleagues after me, but also then to have this as a starter for a dialogue.
Thank you very much, Gilles, for raising a lot of interesting points that deserve greater depth, and we'll pursue that in the Q&A session. I mentioned in passing that even in the business school at Georgia Tech, several of our colleagues have relationships with the Zurich Polytech, and I think Lausanne also. There is a Polytech at Lausanne, correct? Yeah. So we are already weaving a network of science-based researchers with some of your colleagues in Switzerland. We next turn to Dan for a perspective from a corporate actor. Dan, the floor is yours.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. And I so much appreciate the opportunity to speak to this group. It's always a pleasure for us in the private sector to, coordinate, collaborate with the universities and the education system at large. So I don't know, James, were you going to be able to put this? I had a few slides we're going to put up. Is that something I do, or is that something that James is going to be doing?
You have the ability to do that.
Okay. Just bear with me for 1 second. I will do that. Okay, so, sure. Is everyone able to see my screen?
Perfect.
Okay, wonderful. So just a little bit about the UPS Foundation. We repurposed ourselves during the pandemic with everything that was going on in the world, and we had some new leadership, and so we had the opportunity to kind of rethink our framework. And so really previous to say 2020, 2021, we kind of came with it as what we would call a confetti approach, meaning that we did a lot of things. We supported more than 4,000 grants across the globe, but what we've done since then is decide to go in deeper in a bigger way with strategic partners such as CARE, who's on this call, to affect change on the planet. So our 4 pillars are health and humanitarian relief, which is to improve the well-being of people by leveraging our partnerships, innovative logistical expertise, delivering health and humanitarian solutions for underserved and impacted communities. Next, we talk about economic equity and economic empowerment. We're investing in systemic education, economic barriers, and marginal underserved women and children and marginalized communities around the globe. Local community engagement is really our piece of our volunteerism. So we have 540,000 employees around the globe, and we focus on leveraging their ability to work in their communities, helping the world. And then finally, planet protection, which is to advance environmental justice and create a sustainable world. So those are, again, the 4 pillars. John and I talked about this, and so that really ties into the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN goals. And so we are focusing on 5 targeted SDGs, which is the good health and well-being, the reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, life and land, and then finally on partnerships for the goals. So what that looks like from UPS and what that looks like from a sustainability perspective is, our goal is, our vision is to create a more equitable and just world, and our mission is to deliver pathways to empower resilient, just, and safe communities. And how that looks in our health and humanitarian relief space, as an example, is we've delivered 45 million gift-in-kind doses of COVID-19 vaccines in communities in underserved countries in Africa. We've worked with, we focus on training, on making the communities more resilient with organizations such as the logistics cluster and the logistics emergency teams to do capacity assessments. We work with the U.S. Chamber on resilience in a box, so how to small businesses become more resilient. And a little bit about Africa and some of our vaccine work. We've worked with a significant number of countries on drone technology. And so we support drone activities in Ghana, Rwanda, Malawi. We're looking to expand to a few additional countries. And what that does is it has the ability for us to deliver vaccines in a matter of minutes that used to take 4, 6, 8 hours in a diesel truck. And now you have it in a electric drone that it does the decarbonization impacts are fantastic. Some of our focus in humanitarian work also would include alternative fuel vehicles for planet protection. We talk about our goal to plant 50 million trees to advance environmental justice. We have the largest largest fleet of alternative fuel vehicles in the world. We use that as a test bed for new technology. When we work in areas with, as the Jill's talked about, you often are donated goods that aren't appropriate or aren't in the right location in the world to affect crisis, such as we've done working with the recent hurricanes and with the work in Ukraine. So we work with organizations like CARE. We talk about doing cash disbursements, which helps build a more resilient community with local money and keeps the cost of hydrocarbon fuels and jets, etc., from having to move products that may not be the ideal product for what they need. And as far as our local community engagement, again, where our goal is to mobilize 30 million volunteer hours to deliver systemic impact. That's just through our 540,000 employees. And just a quick summary on some of our 2021 successes and the work that we've done. We've delivered, again, last year we delivered 33.5 million COVID vaccines into in need countries. Again, those that are kind of below the line was what we call it in Africa. Those that have less than what the average is for the continent. We had 1.1 million volunteer service hours from our employees. We responded to more than 30 disasters. We supported activities in 170 countries. We had 100,000 volunteer hours in underserved Black communities, mostly in the United States. We had $51 million contributed to the United Way. We provided $70 million in grants and sponsorships, and we planted 3.2 million trees to meet our 50 million tree goal by 2030. And then overall, our new, as part of that 4-pillar strategy for global philanthropy, our goal is to positively impact 1 billion lives by 2040. And so through our support with the SDGs, we are using as a system to measure those lives impacted, working with ministries of health to measure the impact. And I think that's just been it's been a fantastic way for us to make sure that we're leveraging every dollar most efficiently and that we're addressing things from a sustainability perspective. So with that, John, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Dan, for this impressive set of achievements. We'll be talking about it in greater depth in a few seconds. And I'm turning the floor over to Deepmala. Deepmala, please join us. I know you're there online for your presentation. You can either control your own slides or have Jim proceed. So we're doing very well on time, by the way. It is now 10:29. So that should leave quite a bit of time for questions and answers from the audience or from the panel to each other.
Thank you, John. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. And it is my honor to join such a distinguished panel. So I would share, like, very briefly, a few slides about CARE, what do we do, who we are, where we work, and then I'm going to share something around sustainability, humanitarian response, how do we operate in different contexts, and our partnerships with various businesses. So that is my little plan for the 10-15 minutes when I'm going to start now. So I don't know if you would have sent or received a CARE package. So that is the genesis and the birth of CARE. Maybe, James, you could keep moving the slides when I'm talking. So in 1945, a group of concerned citizens here decided to send a CARE package. They came up together with this very simple but very, very powerful idea that few people can make a difference to alleviate suffering. World War II, at the time, those packages went to Europe, and we still know some of the people who have been recipients to the CARE package. Next, please. So last year, we worked in 102 countries, and to be present in a country, we not necessarily need to have a country office. Sometimes it is through a partnership, sometimes it is through an engagement with the women's groups. And to give you a scale, we have reached directly over 100 million people last year. Next, please. So this is the focus areas for care. We truly believe for us to change lives, save lives, and alleviate poverty, our work has to be gender equal, locally led, and globally scaled. What does it mean? Women and girls are at the heart of all we do, all our strategies, programming, investments, and decisions, because women can be and are in many cases really active contributors to the economy, and often they bear the brunt of the crisis. Locally led, I don't think there's any other way to succeed while working with the community. People first, they should be telling us what to do, how to do, and then scale it up. And the learning from other geographies is always helpful. Next, please. This is just to give you a scale that, and my previous speaker also hinted towards, is that the job which we have is massive. The needs are very, very high. Next, please. And this combination of COVID, climate, and conflict has, it's like a dangerous mix of situation. It's a fatal context for many, many countries. It has exacerbated the hunger situation in the world. As we speak tonight, at least 811 million people are going to go to bed hungry. And it's a combination of several factors. And now there are added issues like how the Ukraine war has affected the supply chain. Next, please. I'll not go through in detail, but just wanted to mention, for delivering humanitarian response, we truly believe in a multi-sectoral approach, because if I'm a woman in the community who had to run because of an earthquake or some fighting in my area, if you give me a food packet, that might not solve my problem. Somebody else might need something else. So a multi-sectoral approach is what we have learned over the years, and what a lot of organizations in the sector are following. So we as CARE focus on these 6 which are listed here: health, education, equality, food and water, crisis response, and climate change. Next, please. And I believe that's the last one. Perfect. So perfect. So I'll come to sustainability and humanitarian aid. At times it sounds like 2 different things. Humanitarian aid, that seems very, very time sensitive, short term, and then sustainability is a durable solution. But they are intrinsically linked. They are very, very connected. The communities are very vulnerable, oftentimes before a disaster, during a disaster, and after the disaster. So the nature of humanitarian aid, the quality of it, what is included in the package, can and has made major contribution to sustainable livelihoods, education, etc. Now, what it takes to deliver a humanitarian response, and just gave some really good examples, and clearly logistics. I started as a humanitarian 2 decades ago, and we always said that logistics is the backbone for a strong humanitarian response. But along with that, the key is talking to the communities, asking women, children, girls, what is most useful. A lot of organizations will claim that they are first responders. I would say, don't believe me if I say CARE is the first responder. The first responders are always the community, the women there. They are the first ones to prepare and respond, and then several actors, local, national, international, come and strengthen them. So what it takes to deliver a humanitarian response, it takes relationships with the community, understanding of the context, planning, experience, and I'll come to how a lot of us have a role to play. But let me harp on this point of the communities. You may have heard of the word localization. It is used a lot in the aid and development sector. It is interpreted in different ways by different people. But let's say we at CARE use it in a very simple way, where the affected people, where the crisis has happened, they have a voice in the decision, and they are the ones who are informing the design, delivery, and evaluation of a response. Horn of Africa was mentioned by my previous speakers, and Horn of Africa, there was famine in 2011, and the world promised never ever again. And then it was so close to famine in 2017. Yes, the humanitarian community, NGOs, UN, donors, international community, everybody came together and that famine was averted. 5-6 years down the line, now it's like the last minute of the 11th hour. So it's a larger discussion. How do we end up at the same place every time? And what happens to these international commitments, which are made in very, very beautiful words from very important forums? Words never have saved a life. It is action. And that is what is urgently required now. So like the traditional humanitarian aid packets, food, it's helpful, it's relevant in many contexts, but that is not all of it actually. The unprecedented nature of the crisis, how it is increasing consistently, preparedness is key. Anticipatory action is key. And the way we approach many components of humanitarian responses, let's say logistics, that has to evolve and be more relevant to the day and age. And let me give an example of one of the very beautiful projects which CARE and UPS Foundation actually are implementing jointly. And we started small with 1 or 2 countries. Now it's in 7 countries across West Africa with our tech partner called FlowTech. So what is this work which I'm referring to? So what we are trying to do together. So we have a technology partner, FlowTech. We have UPS Foundation, which is one of the best logistics agencies. And then we have all come together to come up with a software solution for real-time management of inventory, property, commodity, and fleet at the country level, because that is where a lot of the challenges are. So the objective is to automate the core operation functions so that we can have greater oversight, we can make quicker decisions which are based on evidence and higher efficiency. We started with a limited number of countries in West Africa, and Dan would know it has expanded. We've covered all our countries in West Africa, which are about 6 or 7, and now we are taking it to other regions and other geographies, because how effective and how easy it has made in many ways to make decisions. And let me quote one of our humanitarian response officers on the ground, and he said, this has reduced huge amount of paperwork on transfers, issuing and receiving from one location to the other. So we have better paper trail without paper, and it is much more efficient. So this is one example where how evolving how we respond, how we partner is a key role. Now, one more thing, let me bring in. Humanitarian response doesn't happen in isolation. There's a community, people's lives were disturbed. We talk the number of refugees in the world, higher than ever. When people flee, what do they flee with? I've spent a lot of my time in refugee camps, many years of my life, and many have said if they are able to bring their children, they think of themselves as lucky. So a humanitarian response can save life and link them towards recovery, but it is not in isolation. It has to be linked with work of early recovery, which may include livelihood towards education and then transition into development. The challenge of our times, our generation of humanitarians is, and the other humanitarians on this webinar may connect with me. There used to be a humanitarian disaster. We used to run a response. Then we used to go to recovery phase. And then we used to go to development phase. And then we used to wrap up the humanitarian response. If you ask me how many responses have I started or led or provide oversight to starting or expanding, many. How many have I supported closed down in the last few years? I can't remember. So the protracted nature of the crisis is forcing all of us to think differently. For example, if in an area with usually a combination of some climate-related factors and conflict, active conflict, we run a humanitarian response, people get food, water, sanitation, cash assistance, etc. And you start feeling that now we are transitioning people to education and livelihoods, and then let's say fresh fighting erupts and we are back to where we started. So we need to work together for preparedness in everything, that between relief and recovery, we need a toggle switch where we can really quickly pivot so that we are sort of meeting the needs of the ground, essentially, like what's happening in Somalia, or the Horn of Africa. We talk a lot about Somalia, but in Ethiopia 24 million people are affected by drought. So in the Horn of Africa, we definitely need urgent life-saving humanitarian response, and the key priorities are food or food assistance, water, sanitation, therapeutic food for children. However, without links to some climate adaptation work, alternative livelihoods, helping people connect to the market, we may not be able to sustain these gains, and we may be in a similar situation after a couple of years. So the nature of humanitarian work has to also focus more on building resilience and climate adaptation, and that is the focus of CARE's work in many countries. For example, in many of the protracted crises, like let's say some of the parts of Syria, Somalia, we are talking about South Sudan, we are supporting women's collectives, saving groups. And there are successful examples where women have been able to set up, let's say, small businesses like tea shops. And I have met many who have sustained at least for a few years. And all of it is only possible in a sustainable way, where the various pillars and actors come together, which would include NGOs, international, national, local, women's groups, then our corporate partners, our businesses, philanthropists, donors, bilateral governments. And in Q&A, if anybody is curious, I can articulate why we need all these. And businesses are not only a key actor in terms of delivering the humanitarian response, but they are also a key partner because they are affected oftentimes. And when the COVID wave hit in India, the second wave, people may remember the very sobering media coverage, was it June of 21? A lot of the businesses had their production houses, so they are affected. And when a business is affected, is the people, because people are losing their livelihoods, they're reducing their livelihoods, so it's very, very interconnected. And in terms of humanitarian responses being affected, I also want to say, when we think of businesses, there are bigger ones, which we all know, but there might be a small shop to make fresh bread, and their annual turnover might be lesser than somebody's family dinner. But those are businesses, and they are contributing to the economy and playing an active role when disasters hit. So I would say, when we look at the humanitarian needs overview in the last 2 years, the numbers are grim. And no projection is saying that it is getting any better. And now we have, for the last 6.5 months, we have the Russia-Ukraine war, which has really affected the supply chain, fuel prices. And we are seeing that in Kenya, middle-income country, that is also facing high levels of malnutrition and food insecurity in some parts. And the increasing food prices are playing a key role. So it's so important for us to come together, act now, and each one has a role to play. There are 300,000 children in Somalia who are at the risk of dying by November. So on one hand, we can keep discussing and making pledging and making promises. Those kids may not survive. So it is about here and now, and urgency is the approach that we need to take. So with that, I pass it back to you, John, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Deepmala, for an inspiring presentation. So we have a number of questions. So let me get started with the first question, which I think will capture the interest of all three participants. Could you provide us with some examples of successful multi-agency, multi-sector collaborations or partnerships, public-private sector partnership being a UN SDG goal, by the way, but it's a systemic approach. You obviously need upstream and downstream resources, not only as you deploy in crisis mode to react to disasters, but also upstream in terms of development. So what are some of the best examples you can provide? I'm reminded that the crisis in Puerto Rico is a repeat performance. This is the second time it happens in a very few short months. So perhaps with Gilles, leveraging the considerable experience of the International Red Cross in terms of putting together partnerships, successful partnerships. You, of course, evoked some of them during your presentations, but can you elaborate? Then turning over to Dan, from your position as a corporate leader of a large global company with logistical wings spread worldwide, and from Deepmala's position with tremendous experience in Africa, but so many other sites where you have a combination of developmental problems and disaster reliefs, emergency problems. Gilles.
Yes, John, excellent question, and indeed one where I think we all have garnered a range of experiences of what works, what doesn't, and how to best make it happen. And I think both Dan and Deepmala have also alluded to a number of them. So when I just mentioned the kind of exchanges that we have with, in that case, a food company and a medical pharmaceutical company, what is interesting is sometimes these are partnerships that are very much organic because we have a long-standing relationship with suppliers, and then suppliers want to do more. Sometimes they have a real interest also from their staff and others to try to be part of the solution. And in that case, we have, for instance, as I mentioned, in the case of our warehousing and also the handling of goods and services to Ukraine, in-kind donation, and from there an interest of the company to say, well, how can we support not only in that case because this was by chance, but more systematically, how can we scale up and work with others? And I think that this is where we have learned that it's important to take the time to have a clear framing of what we can do together, and again bring it to no exclusivity, meaning that it's open to to be broadened to other humanitarian organizations and in the sector. And I think what we have to avoid is to have finally to be locked in either a technology or a range of products that after a couple of years are not what the best we can have because of a long-standing partnership. So we need this capacity to revisit are they effective? Are they providing value in terms of humanitarian outcomes for the population that is affected by a protracted armed conflict or by a crisis? And these are, I think, where we have to invest more, because for humanitarian organization, it is challenging, but we are getting better and trying to measure or at least have a good idea of what is the impact that we have through our operations. And then we have to disentangle how much this impact is greater, is more effective, thanks to a partnership, because we have invested in the relationship.
In the field, so do you find there are conflicts or competition between different NGOs in terms of coordination in delivering assistance? Could that ever be the case, or is everybody coordinating, or are you acting as a coordinator at the ICRC?
There are a whole range of coordination mechanisms, especially under the UN, the United Nations, but we do participate as Red Cross represent movements to the coordination, although we are independent, and international NGOs very often are also at the table. And I think, as I mentioned, the challenges we are facing are so immense that there is no time for competition. There is only time for collaboration and synergetic relationships to try to bring all our specific expertise, our the specific mandate that we have, the mission, the expertise, the experience, the capacities, and to try how best we can really collectively respond to the needs that we see out there. I think Deepmala mentioned indeed a food security crisis that is really more than alarming, that is in the making in the Horn of Africa, and especially in Somalia, where we are also quite active. So I think these are issues we have to deal together, but also not only on emergency response, which is key, but as working together to try to build resilience and to build what we call sustainable humanitarian impact, which means that how can we, as soon as possible, provide affected populations with the means so that they can generate an income, so that they can have access to essential services without depending on aid forever. And that's where I think the power of partnerships with be the private sector, be the development world and others is really, it's a must to do that.
We have very limited time and a lot of interesting questions which deserve ample exposure, but I'll turn it over to Dan and then to Deepmala relating to the question of sharing some examples of successful multi-agency, multi-sector collaborations in the field. There's a question that is sort of popping up in my visual field here. It's the question of the floods in Pakistan, which have impacted 8 million people. Perhaps you can weave it in as you go on with the original question so that we do not do short shrift to that particular issue in the remaining 10 minutes.
Sure.
Dan.
Yeah, absolutely. I will talk a little bit of a perfect example. I think of that multi-sectoral agency engagement would be the COVID response in Africa. So, COVAX was the mechanism that was designed to distribute vaccines in Africa, never with the intention of having an ultra cold chain type of product is within that supply chain. Certainly, that was some of them from an efficacy perspective was probably the best type of solution. So we worked with the ministries of health and with the manufacturers to develop training on how to handle ultra cold chain vaccines in countries. We produced video segments for training. We produced content for in country so we could train the ministries of health. We could train the NGOs. We could train frontline healthcare workers on how to do that. We then partnered with a manufacturer of a small portable ultra cold chain freezer that we could distribute in countries, so you could utilize those in the remote field. The issue in most countries was there was a large ultra cold chain storage, perhaps near the capital city airport. There was no way to get those out into the field. We partnered with a drone organization to distribute those in a fast and economical way. We worked with a company to develop a soft box, which is like a very sophisticated cooler, so you could store vaccines for up to 96 hours in transit. We worked with a technology company to develop a phone app so we could track the vaccines throughout their journey, and we worked with a temperature control company to measure every box, so we knew that we didn't have challenges with temperature control. So like that was, we worked with, and obviously worked with the NGOs and ministries of health to effectively get vaccines into people's arms throughout countries. I think that was a great example of how we did that multi-sectorally across many organizations. As far as Pakistan, a lot of our function has been gift in kind transportation. So I'm sure Deepmala probably has deeper web working with her organization on our response, but ours has largely been providing gift in kind transportation to get essential products to people. So
Are you able to, you have a huge fleet of aircraft carriers as UPS freestanding. Are you able to leverage those effectively in responding to crises?
We do. Yes, we do absolutely use our aircraft for charter. We actually have a program that our organization developed called Eduardo. And what that does is that tracks every aircraft. With the help of Google, we developed a technology to track every aircraft moving throughout the world, including passenger aircraft and cargo aircraft. And so we can understand where capacity is around the globe when there is needed response to to a crisis.
Are you able to get support from the US Department of Defense or other defense agencies in the world that have huge logistical networks?
We do, and we're part of that of the civil air response that provides us to use our capacity. We use that capacity moving PPE during the COVID crisis. We use that capacity even most recently when there was the massive shortage of formula here in the United States, moving product back here. We've used that moving products to response to Ukraine, both air and ground. So we've used that, our network and networks of other organizations all the time.
Thank you very much, Dan. Deepmala, I know we had talked about it, and I'm firmly convinced, and I know that for a fact, that women are usually the most impacted in disaster and conflicts. But at the same time, there is an upstream set of considerations that are of a developmental nature. And I know you have devoted a good bit of your career to improving through microfinancing initiatives and the like. In terms of multi-agency, multi-sector initiatives, are there some you can think of that would benefit particularly women who are most impacted in many of the areas in which you have expertise and knowledge?
Absolutely, thank you. So several examples. Let me pick one from Bangladesh, where CARE worked for several decades. So we developed many microfinance models, self-help groups where women could save money and then loan. And then there are, you know, that Bangladesh is very flood prone. So there have been many examples where the disaster struck, but the community, because of the women getting engaged in economic empowerment activities, they did not need that much of humanitarian aid because they were resilient, they were prepared for the shock. I would also say different actors succeeding. I would say the averting of famines in 2017. You must have heard about the 4 famines. It was declared in South Sudan, but Nigeria, Yemen, Somalia were on the brink, and then everybody worked together to avert that. I think last I would say working with women and girls, Afghanistan, everybody was taken aback. 15th of August last year. CARE had spent many decades working on home and community-based education. And this example of success might sound a bit bizarre, but there's a reason why I mention it. So women, girls cannot go to high school now. It's been over a year. But when I speak to women, girls, our local partners there, yes, there is desperation, there is sadness, but because we could work there for so many years, let me quote what somebody told me in Kabul. They said, nobody can uneducate a woman. You have made an investment, we have learned, and we will find ways to, you know, transfer this learning. And I do want to make a quick mention on Pakistan. I have to say, I'm amazed and very disappointed by the minimal media coverage. And the biggest problem with responding to the Pakistan crisis is lack of resources. CARE has been on the ground from day one, along with several of our national partners. Our primary response focus is around shelter, healthcare, and food assistance. A donor pledging conference happened yesterday or day before. Again, we are still waiting for donors to step up. European Union has made a commitment, which is very, very welcome. And there's a question around cash, which if you say I can very quickly answer. How do we decide, is it cash or is it kind, and how much it is? So just hinted about the coordination mechanism. So normally the humanitarian actors, basically NGOs of all sorts and UN, we come together in something what we call cash working group, and we agree on a minimum amount based on the needs. Normally, if I have to generalize it in the interest of time, if the market is functional, if access is not an issue, then cash assistance, because it supports the local economy, it is dignified, it gives them a choice. But if the market is not functional, or the things are not available, or prices are fluctuating too much, then it would go to in kind. John.
Thank you very much. We have very little time left, but I do have a question. I think Pinar might join me in that question. How do we attract more humanitarian-minded, skillful students with talent in technical and managerial fields to the humanitarian undertaking? You all have followed careers that have taken a different road, but here you are doing your best to really relieve humanity's misery. How do we do that with a new generation? And I know Pinar, as director of the Center for Health and Humanitarian Services, and myself as head of a federally funded Center for International Business in the US, ask ourselves the question, how can we do good? And also motivate our students to do so. It's an open-ended question. I'd be curious how Gilles would react, because I'm sure in your teaching in the field of developmental economics, you probably face that issue. How many students have you convinced to undertake such careers as a measure of achievement?
No, it's really something which is very dear to my heart. You're right, and you know, I will start with an anecdote. I had once a very bright young student from Latin America, and he was super critical of humanitarianism. And during the few seminars where we focused on you know, specific issues related to humanitarianism, including humanitarian principles, he was always challenging the whole concept and the whole approach. And it was great because we had very good discussions in the seminar, but it was always tough questions and never convinced. 2 years later, I became, you know, I took my job here at the ICRC. Who do I see in the corridor? That student coming back from a mission in the Great Lake region. And I said, what are you doing here? You were so critical. How come you are at the ICRC? I said, Professor, this was my dream. I say, well, you could have said it because it would have been made my life easier as a professor. But I think it's great that we attract critical, super smart young people who are super motivated, but want to be convinced that, you know, as we know, the good intentions, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So we have to do no harm and to really walk the talk in what we want to achieve. But the second point I would like to say is that I'm really surprised when I discussed with local young volunteers, especially young volunteers of the Red Cross and Red Crescent chapters. And when I started, you know, they all wanted to do first aid. Now to provide the type of services needed, some of them, they say, I joined because I'm fascinated about the tracing part where we use new IT innovations in order to be able to reunite families in a more smarter, effective manner. And for them, it's really bringing their own skills and expertise and learning at the same time. And, you know, they see it as a way to give, but also to learn skills, know-how that is very useful for them as well. And I think that nowadays the demand for accountability from affected populations is such that we have to bring, you know, top quality services that do correspond to what they want, what they need, and do not create unnecessary dependencies and help them find solutions. And for that, we need the smartest young people coming from academia. And I must say that I'm really encouraged by the level of motivation, by the level of attractiveness of the humanitarian sector, despite the fact that sometimes it's a very tough job, might be dangerous. It must be discouraging because, you know, often we want look for the best, but we sometimes fail, not out of bad intention, but because the situation is so complex that we don't achieve our goals. And I really see youth all over the world, but including very bright people from tech schools and others who do that. Final point, John, I mentioned the partnership that we have been involved in with the tech school of Zurich and Lausanne. And we have a range of docs and postdoc students who have been engaged with us as researchers. And some of them, they say, oh, I want to move on and prototype and apply some of the solutions that we have developed through research, and I'd like to work with you. So it's also a way to, you know, get a broader set awareness among future leaders in technology who see how actually science and technology can be a force for good, but we also as the guardian and the promoter of the laws of war, we are also very much aware that technological and scientific advances can also be put into new means and methods of warfare that would have dramatic consequences and must be regulated with anticipation. So I think with this, there is a real dialogue where I'm very confident that we can attract the people in tech schools and also engage with them on difficult conversations, which are fundamentally ethical discussions.
Thank you very much. One area we didn't have a chance to look at is really the outstanding work of the International Red Cross since the 1860s, the four conventions, the law of war. We have no time for that today, but that is indeed of the essence, given what's going on in the world. Please, the floor is open a little bit longer for Dan, Pinar, and Deepmala to talk about inspiring the next generation and providing internships, providing opportunities, guiding through research and other means the next generation of humanitarians.
Well, certainly from UPS and the UPS Foundation perspective, it's large area of our focus is around volunteerism of our employees. So, we have, again, like I mentioned, 540,000 employees, and we have, millions of hours dedicated to volunteerism. So I think, that's one area that we focus. We also focus on our business resource group, so that enables our young, bright employees to engage in projects that are meaningful outside of their normal work. So as an example, the Eduardo, which is that global aircraft tracking program, was a function of our business resource group from one of our technology units. So yeah, it's certainly a little bit different than maybe from the educational perspective and becoming a career in it, because of our foundation is a small but mighty team of folks, and that's not the core component of our business, but certainly it enables people to have an opportunity to engage in that. And I think secondly, from a messaging perspective, we need to continue to do a better job of telling our story of the things that we do as an organization, and get people excited and involved with those types of activities.
Thank you.
Back over to you, John.
Yes, Deepmala, you are going to have the last word, and then I'm going to to take us out.
Okay, so CARE has a very active internship program. We welcome interns in all walks of life, life as in humanitarian life. Specific to your question, how do we attract students? Perhaps connecting them to the reality so that they understand that humanitarianism is not a PowerPoint presentation. It is actually getting your hands dirty. And the more they hear about how it makes changes in people's lives. And I must say, there is something very satisfying about rolling your sleeves up and getting your hands dirty on the ground.
Thank you. Thank you very much, really, for these great answers. Pinar, you are the heart of Georgia Tech's experience and undertaking in humanitarian systems. So please bring this to a conclusion, but at the same time, open the floor to more questions directed at each individual panelist.
Yeah, I would like to thank, first of all of our amazing panelists and moderators, John McIntyre. This was an amazing discussion. I learned a lot. And of course, many thanks to the French Consulate and Georgia Tech and others for organizing the overall Transatlantic program and others to support it and participate in it. So coming back to engaging the next generation in these issues, whether it's long-term development, addressing some of the goals among the sustainable development goals, or whether it's disaster preparedness, response, recovery. I think, first of all, awareness, making them aware of some of these issues, because they might grow up in environments which do not necessarily give them the visibility into the challenges faced by different communities in their own state or all around the world. So I think awareness is key. And second, I would like to also emphasize what John and others said, engaging them in projects, internships, and other activities, because that really, really helps them learn more and become more enrolled and become more committed. So I know that all the organizations represented here do that with students and also with academia, but we hopefully will see more of it moving forward. So I don't want to take up any more time, but just want to thank everybody again, and looking forward to continuing this discussion and working with all of you. So back to John.
Heartfelt thanks to all of you. Hope we meet again and pursue the dialogue and get our hands dirty, as you would say, Deepmala. Okay, cheers. Have a great afternoon, a great lunch, and see you soon. Thank you, Pinar. Goodbye.